Hello friends, welcome to UPSC Logics, and in this video we shall have a look at the Indian Councils Act 1861. So there were three Councils Act that were brought out. One was in 1861, the other one was in 1909, and the last one was in 1919. So these particular acts were brought out with the sole objective that India should not have another mutiny like the 1857 one. So let us see what the Indian Councils Act 1861 had to offer to India. The Government of India Act 1858 transferred the power from the company to the British Parliament, and in the aftermath of the mutiny of 1857, it was a general perception in England that it would be very difficult to secure the government in India without the cooperation of Indians in the administration. So the Indian Councils Act 1861 was passed by the British Parliament on 1st of August 1861, and it was basically to make substantial changes to the composition of the Governor General's Council for the executive and legislative purposes. So the most significant feature of this particular act was the association of Indians in the legislation work, and these were the main reasons for enacting some of the legislations so that they could overhaul the system of administration in India by involving Indians into the administrative field. Let us have a look at the reasons why the Councils Act of 1861 was required. Number one reason was that the centralized lawmaking process was found to be defective. We have seen that the Charter Act of 1833 had centralized the whole process of legislation and taken away the powers from Madras and Bombay to make their own legislations. And the whole idea behind the centralization of lawmaking process was to secure one law for all the territory of the East India Company, but the system was proving to be defective. Since there was only one representative each of the four provinces, it failed to make laws that suited the local conditions, and thus there was a requirement that the provinces should be allowed to make their own laws. Then number two reason was that the Governor General in Council was overburdened. The Governor General in Council was already looking after the administration of the British India, and this had caused them to put the legislative functions on the backdrop. In fact, it was a cumbersome process, and there were delays in enactments of various legislations that were required on hand. The number three reason that was found was the absence of representation. Since there was no representation of people in this particular process, there was a growing demand that the representation of the local element should be there in the Legislative Council. Let us have a look at the features of this particular act. So the Executive Council was increased from 6 to 12 members, and there was an involvement of Indians in the lawmaking process. Lord Canning appointed three Indians, namely Raja of Banaras, Shri Dinkar Rao and Maharaja of Patiala, to his Legislative Council as non-official members. The number two point was decentralization of power from the Presidency of Bengal, and the legislative powers were restored to presidencies of Bombay and Madras so they could make their own legislations with the approval of Governor General or Viceroy. And there was a reversal of Regulation Act of 1773 and Charter Act of 1833. So if this question is asked, which particular act reversed the Regulation Act of 1773 and Charter Act of 1833, it was the Councils Act 1861. Then number three point was the establishment of new legislative councils for Northwest Frontier Province 1862, Punjab 1866 and Bengal 1897, and this was the special power given to the Viceroy where you could create new provinces and create a new legislative council. So these were the three new legislative councils created. Number four point was system of portfolio was introduced by Lord Canning in 1859 and was adopted in making members of the council responsible for the individual departments. So delegation of power was done, and this is still followed to date. Then number five point was it allowed the Viceroy to make ordinances without consultation from the Legislative Council in case of emergency, which lasted for 6 months. And this particular power is still with the President, where he can pass ordinances when the Parliament is in recess. The Councils Act of 1861 expanded the Executive Council of the Governor General or the Viceroy, and a fifth member was added to the Executive Council of the Governor General, and he was a finance member. So there were initially four members, then it became three, then again it became four, and one law member was added who was Macaulay, and now a fifth member was added. Then for the legislative purposes, a provision was made for addition of 6 to 12 members to the central executive, and at least half of these additional members were to be non-officials. And these members were nominated by the Viceroy for a period of 2 years, so this was a special power of the Viceroy. And he appointed three princes, basically Raja of Banaras, Sardinkar Rao, and Maharaja of Patiala as these non-official members to the Executive Council. Let us have a look at the powers of the Viceroy which were given through the Indian Council Act 1861. And he was authorized to nominate a president to preside over the meeting of the Executive Council in his absence. Then number two power that was that he was given the power to making rules and regulations for the conduct of business of the Executive Council. Number three was that he could create new provinces for legislative purposes and to appoint lieutenant governors for them. So as we know that new legislative councils were created for NFPW, then Bengal and Punjab. Then he was also empowered to alter, modify and adjust the limits of the provinces. He could promulgate ordinances without the concurrence of the Legislative Council during an emergency. And though the Central Council was empowered to legislate on all subjects concerning all persons and courts in the British India, but every bill had to be passed with and required the assent of the Viceroy. Then he could withhold his assent or exercise his veto power if he felt that the bill affected the safety, peace, and interest of the British India. And last but not the least, he had to communicate all laws to the Secretary of State for India, who could disallow them with the assent of the Crown. So let us have a look at the decentralization process. As we know that the power to legislate for the Bombay and Madras presidencies were restored, and they were given a power to nominate an advocate general and at least 4 to 8 members to the Executive Council for the purpose of legislation. And these additional members were to hold office for just 2 years, and the consent of the governor and the governor general was made necessary for all legislation passed or amended by the governments of Madras and Bombay. So there was a check on these particular legislations that were being made by these particular presidencies. And furthermore, this particular act provided for establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, Northwestern Frontier Province, and Punjab, as we have seen that this was additional power of the Viceroy, and they were established in 1862, 1866, and 1897 respectively. So let us analyze this act of 1861 and see why this particular act failed to impress the Indians. Although this particular act is an important part of the constitutional history of India, because this was the first time that the Governor General was going to associate people of the land with the work of legislations. Then there was decentralization of the legislative powers, and the powers of Bombay and Madras were restored. And in fact, this particular grant gave almost complete internal autonomy to these provinces in 1937. These particular legislative councils, which consisted of Indians as well, were merely talk shops. They had no real power, they could not criticize the administration or ask for any kind of information. And besides the legislative purpose, which of course required the assent of the Viceroy or the Governor General, they had got no real power of any kind. They even didn't have the power to vote for no confidence motion against the Viceroy or the Governor General. Then the next step, which was that the Viceroy could actually nominate three members to the Executive Council, was also an eyewash, because this was just done to placate the princes whom the Britishers wanted to keep in their stronghold. So in case there was a mutiny, these particular princes could actually help the British government in subduing it. And of course, then the ordinance making power was with the Governor General, and he could make laws according to his whims and fancies to protect the British India. So, to summarize this whole particular Indian Councils Act 1861 was that although it involved the Indians in the lawmaking process, but they did not give any real power to the Indians to dictate terms to the British. The last say was always with the Viceroy or the Governor General. So friends, this was some information about the Councils Act of 1861. I hope you have enjoyed this video and understood this particular Councils Act. If you are a first time watcher, do like and subscribe to this channel in case you have enjoyed the video. In case you are a regular subscriber and haven't pressed the bell icon, do press the bell icon for all the new notifications from UPSC Logics. Thank you so much for watching and Jai Hind.